Welcome to Public Health Matters, the show that addresses public health issues that matter the most to the citizens of Harford County. Real issues, real people, and the information you need to know.
Hello, I'm Molly Mraz, Public Information Officer for the Harford County Health Department, and your host for today's Public Health Matters. It's the show that takes a closer look at the public health issues that matter the most to the citizens of Harford County. According to the CDC, each year in the United States, around 702 people die from a heat-related death each year. Already, the Maryland Department of Health announced that Prince George's County man in his 40s became Maryland's first heat-related death in 2021. And today we're going to be talking about heat illness and how to stay safe during those hot months. Joining me today are Dr. David Bashai, Harford County Health Officer, and Edward Hopkins, Director of Emergency Services for Harford County. Welcome to our show, and thank you for being here today.
Hi, you're welcome.
I'm so glad to be back in the studio after a year hiatus, and it's perfect timing to talk about heat illness because it's moving into the summer months. It's very hot outside today, and it's so great, Eddie, to have you here.
Glad to be here.
People are probably used to seeing you on this, on not this show, but on
the network,
on TV. So here you are in the flesh. We have you here. So if you could both talk a little bit about what your role is with the county, and Dr. Bashai, you being an ER physician, if you want to kind of introduce yourself.
As the health officer of the county, it's my job to work with all the other government agencies and people in the EMS, as well as the hospitals and schools, so that when we're facing an environmental threat to our health, we work together to keep the residents safe. And being prepared means doing things like now to get people ready if we were to develop a severe heat wave. We know how serious these problems are. Last year in France during COVID, they had a heat wave and 1,900 people died of the heat wave and only 100 people died of COVID. So we're learning that you have to be ready, and people in France weren't ready. They didn't have enough people with the information they needed to stay safe and healthy and get to shelter and cooling when the thermometer went up. So we don't want to make that mistake. We want to work together to get the public to know how serious a heat wave can be for the health of everybody in the county.
Very good. I think, do you want to?
So sure. So as a role in emergency services, my job is to oversee all of or liaise with all of the public safety service agencies in the county, and then bring real-time situational awareness to all those entities in the event of any type of a disaster. And of course, the topic of our show today is heat. So our role in this would be to promptly prepare the county and all of our stakeholders to coordinate a response to a heat-related emergency or critical event if it would occur. So we're sort of the aggregator. We pull all the resources together, make everyone situationally aware, and then help them plan their response to this event.
And I think we're really lucky in Harford County because our community partners work so well together, and so we're just lucky to have everybody on board. But both of you kind of have a special skill set. You were EMS like through and through, and so you have so much experience with the safety of Harford County residents. And then Dr. Bashai, your emergency room visits that you see, any of them heat related?
Sure, we're already seeing some heat related illness, and we typically see a whole lot more of something called heat exhaustion, where typically a young person is just working too hard out in the heat. Typically they're out at a parade or out doing sports and they just didn't keep up with their hydration, and they often faint or just don't feel right. They feel dizzy. They're perspiring like crazy, and then just because they've lost so much water, they don't feel good. And the first aid for that is to get them out of the heat, get them into shade, get them indoors into air conditioning, and offer them the hydration. And if they'll drink water, Gatorade, that's good enough. And now we want to prevent that too. And we want coaches and sports participants to really understand how important it is to not exercise in the middle of the day. If it's at all possible to put your workouts during the cooler hours of the day during a heat wave, or cancel them altogether. And in fact, fact, after we get up into the 110 heat index, we really don't think people should be outdoors doing exertion. And people who have to do it for a living should also try to time it if they're in the landscaping or construction business and it's that hot. There's just no reason, if you can avoid it, to be out in the heat. I mean, trying to drink your way through one of these events with water and Gatorade isn't as smart as just retiming it. So what I see in the ER, in fact, it happened to my daughter. She was in the high school band, out there marching around, and she fainted when she was a junior. They took her to the ER, rehydrated her, and she was home in a couple hours. Now, that didn't have to happen. Shouldn't have been out there. We want coaches and officials to really be aware of the need to keep youth athletes out of the heat and make sure they've got enough access to water and Gatorade while they're exercising. In fact, some coaches will actually weigh the kids and see if they've lost 5% of their weight during an afternoon, they're out of line. They shouldn't be out there doing that. People should be very sensitive to how dangerous the heat can be during the summer months.
You just went through my all my talking points, so we're done now. No, I'm kidding. How would somebody know if it's too hot outside?
Well, there's a lot of ways. Eddie, I think you have criteria.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. People, if it's too hot to go out, when they get outside, they would start feeling the overwhelming heat. They would feel that sense of just perspiring without even being active. Just knowing that the pavement, you can see the heat resonate off the ground. There's really a lot of telltale signs when somebody can look outside and see, and when they step outside and feel, that can tell you what is right and what's not right. And then when you step outside and get that overwhelming sense of just heaviness on your body from the heat and the challenge with breathing, immediate perspiration, then it becomes, then there's a question, do you continue your activity or then do you go back inside and make an alternative plan?
It's like when I look out my bedroom window in the morning and I can see the fog on the window, you know it's going to be a very hot day.
Yes.
You talk about people having a hard time breathing, and so there are people who should not be outside in the heat. Dr. Beshai, can you indicate?
Yeah, so the heat-related death and the more serious forms of heat illness is called heat stroke. And when we say 702 Americans died and that individual in Prince George's, that was probably a death from heat stroke. And heat stroke is more likely to happen to select groups. It's more likely to happen to children under 4 because their brains don't regulate their sweating and their heat well. So children under 4 are susceptible to heat stroke, and people over 60, 65, senior citizens are. And even at any age, there are medications that make you susceptible to heat stroke. The medications are blood pressure pills that are diuretics that make you lose water, and a lot of psychiatric medicines, ordinary medicines people take for depression or schizophrenia, mood stabilizers will make you susceptible to heat stroke. And so if you're on those medications, keep taking the medications, but just realize when it's hot, you're the one that has to stay in the air conditioning side and you need to modify your behavior. Cocaine is another street drug that is commonly associated with heat stroke. So it's not different groups have to be differentially aware. Getting back to what Eddie was saying, other than losing your eyeballs, these days people have smartphones and you can just say, Alexa, what is today's heat index? And Alexa will tell you a number. That number is a combination of the heat and the humidity, and the cutoff is above 103. I think we'll get an alert out after 105. The heat index is on your phone. If you say, what's the temperature today? It'll say, today it's saying 89 degrees, feels like 99. Feels like is the number. So today it's 99. 4 or 5 degrees more, and if I was taking an antidepressant or if I was on a diuretic, I would say I am not going out in the heat today because I'm at risk of heat stroke and I really need to take care of myself and not be exposed to those high heat indexes. So Alexa is your friend on this.
What if,
and just to add to one point too, a lot of people have pre-existing medical conditions that the heat can exacerbate the problem. So a person who may suffer heat exhaustion may not, would segue to heat stroke because of the pre-existing medical condition that they have. So people have to be not only cognizant with the medications, as Dr. Beshai alluded to, but also what is your health history? And could the heat antagonize or exacerbate an already existing medical condition?
Right. And why are the psychiatric medications, why do they stick out for susceptible to heat illness?
Yeah, so a lot of the psychiatric medicines, because they affect the brain, they go to receptors called acetylcholine receptors. And all of our sweat glands are also driven by acetylcholine receptors. So some of the side effects of a psychiatric medication is often a dry mouth or less sweat than usual. Because these medications interrupt our ability to sweat, they interrupt our natural way of cooling off the body.
Is it true that you're dehydrated? If you feel thirsty, you're already dehydrated.
Correct. And thirst is your number one friend. There are people that doesn't work for them, but almost everybody can rely on their thirst. And if you're thirsty, drink. I don't think you have to do more than that. Just don't be thirsty and you've drunk enough. I know there are other doctors and public health people that say, no, you have to drink 8 glasses, 10 glasses, drink. And have you drunk your water today? Thirst is your friend. If you're thirsty, drink. If you're not thirsty, you're okay.
Do your phone calls at 911 center, do they increase during the summer for heat?
They do. There's definitely an uptick because some people who simply, especially now in light of COVID, where people were boxed in and housed up for so long, now people are getting out, people are experiencing the outdoors in greater numbers than ever before, but people aren't thinking to plan ahead. So not only is there an uptick in numbers for heat-related calls, but there's an uptick in numbers for outdoor-related injuries along the same line. But yes, we do see an uptick in heat-related calls, and anecdotally following Dr. Beshai from our end, is more for heat exhaustion than for heat stroke is what we see, or heat cramps.
Okay, so talk about the difference of those because, and the symptoms maybe for each of those, Dr.
Sure,
Beshai.
the simple difference is that with heat exhaustion, you're just going to feel dizzy, but your brain is working. There's no confusion, there's no interruption in the function of the nervous system. And with heat exhaustion, you're sweating, you're damp. If you go beyond that to heat stroke, you are no longer sweating. They're often dry, not sweating at all. They've used up all their sweat and they're dry. They're often bright red and their brains aren't working. They're confused. Worse, they'll stop being conscious and people can go into a coma. That's very late in the game. We want nobody to get that far. As soon as you feel dizzy, like you're not feeling well, stop right there, get inside. Should never get all the way to heat stroke. People often, when they're in the middle of an exercise match or they're in a running situation, that adrenaline's going to push them forward and they can go very quickly into heat stroke, which is why we want athletes to really respect the limits of human capability and don't do these endurance activities in the middle of the heat, because they can go straight into coma and loss of consciousness because they've just driven themselves beyond their capability.
We were talking a little bit before the show about, high heat doesn't necessarily mean more fires, but you were talking about it's just harder on the firefighters.
Right, it's harder really on everybody, but specifically the firefighters, because they're wearing between 60 to 80 pounds worth of gear to go in, to make the rescue, to attack the fire, suppress the emergency, whatever that may be. But in addition to those people who may be affected by the fire that are displaced, now they're outside in the heat as well. So now you have the element of a large potential fire, which is creating obviously very high degree temperatures. And you have firefighters who are fighting that in firefighting turnout gear. And now you have victims that are a short ways away, but they're still feeling the residual heat. They're still out in the heat because, as fate would have it, rarely when we have these situations is there ever a cooling center nearby or a shade tree. It always seems to be that house that's out in the middle of a yard with no trees for shade. Right. So it really does affect everybody. But from the firefighters' perspective, yes, very, very hard work for them. They have to rotate their crews frequently and stay very well hydrated.
Yeah, it's just something I didn't even think about until we were discussing it, and I'm sure, other people wouldn't unless you've either been in that situation before or it kind of hits close to home.
It's the same with our police officers who wear obviously soft body armor for bullet protection. The gear they wear is a little less cumbersome than fire department turnout gear, but nonetheless it's heavy and they suffer the same. They need the same type of exposure protection as firefighters do, just to a different degree, if you will.
Right. And you mentioned the word cooling center.
Yes.
And so that's something we kind of wanted to talk about today because they're underutilized here in Harford County, but there are so many around the county. Right. So do you want to talk about the cooling centers?
We've worked over the past couple of years. We have worked to identify cooling centers. Our challenge is finding enough of them and finding them all across the county because there is a lot of work and a lot of volunteerism that's required to staff one of those centers. That being said, however, we have a very good relationship with the library system. And when we know that these indices are going to reach 105, and as Dr. Beshai alluded to earlier, we're following all the weather all the weather services that feed us that weather information. And we know it's coming. We alert the library system and prepare them and make the arrangements to make sure that they will be open during a period of time where people hopefully can go to those locations. So in the backup plan for that, because there's never enough cooling centers, no one ever really wants to be in a shelter. When we have evacuation shelters, that's the last place somebody wants to evacuate to. So it's sort of a redundant backup, if you will. But if you know the indices are going to be high and you know you're in a dangerous environment, we advocate proper planning ahead of time for the family member to reach out to another family member and say, can I come stay with you, or can I come stay with a friend? Or a mall, go to a mall or a shopping center and spend the day there where it's cooler. So there are a number of other facilities, even though we can't accommodate everyone as we would like to the best that we can. The libraries serve as a primary force, but we always recommend people have a multiplicity of backups that they can fall back on if they're not near a library.
I feel like
And
there's
you don't-
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, you don't know you need it till you need it. I know a lot of people don't even turn on their air conditioner all year, and then suddenly the heat goes on and it might not work.
Yes.
So I would say, if you're hearing this now, check out your air conditioner to make sure it's going to work. Have an air conditioner plan. If you have a child under 4 or a family member over 60, or you're on these medications or have a chronic medical condition, have an air conditioner plan. How am I going to get to an air conditioner during the heat wave?
Molly, that is so key, because when we teach planning and preparedness, it's counterintuitive in February to have an HVAC system checked for the summer. But you really want to check your system before you get into the summer. Dr. Bashai is absolutely right. So it's really the opposite season. So, and you want to check your heat this summer before you hit the winter, but you want to check your air conditioner before it gets to summer, because other people who may be complacent and wait till the last minute may put you lower in a priority, and then you are stuck. So he's absolutely correct.
Do you think it's worse? Would it be worse to not have your air conditioning working, or worse to not have your heat working? Because you can cover with blankets, right? If you were cold, to avoid hypothermia, but not necessarily get cool, if you didn't have air conditioning. You don't have to answer
In
it
terms
today. I
of
just
what we're
wasn't.
seeing, we are seeing far more deaths from being too hot than
Yeah.
being too cold
Yeah.
in this part of the world.
Right.
And coming into the future, we know that temperatures in Maryland, these number of heat wave events are projected to double in the next 2 decades. So what we saw last year in Europe is coming to America. What you said is 702, and unless we're prepared, that number's only going to go up as the number of heat waves in American cities increases over the coming years.
Right. I have a quick question about the cooling centers. Do you think that there's a stigma attached to the cooling centers, having to go evacuate to the cooling centers?
No, I think maybe there's a stigma attached to it in a disaster setting. People don't want to go because they feel like, what could they have done differently? But I think when air conditioning, if it fails or if it's not functioning, it's a place to go. So I don't think the stigma attaches there as much maybe as it would to an evacuation site when you're there because you've been the result of a disaster, or maybe the result of an accident that happened to you because you made a mistake.
You don't have your television, you don't have your refrigerator. If you want to drink, ginger ale, sorry, you're in a library, and
Right.
it's way more fun to be in your own house.
Right. That's true. You don't have your amenities there. I have a statistic here that I want to read, and then we can talk about that. There were 25 pediatric deaths in 2020 due to being left in the car. How does that happen? How do people, now I'm a mom too, so I'm just playing devil's advocate here because I completely understand how that happens, but there are people that really don't understand how that even happens, and leaving their kids in the hot car, and then it's just too late. So we'll start with you, Dr. Bashai, about your
I
experience.
think it is a tragedy that this still happens, and I just feel for the children, the families, because this guilt and just you can't forgive yourself after this. One way it happens is you think, I'm just going to dash right in, right? You're busy, I'm just going to grab a loaf of bread, I'll be right back, and then something happens and you're not back and you don't think of it. It's just a matter of habit that you check your car every time you get out of it, look for pets and children as a matter of habit. In the future, vehicles will have alarms that go off. They alarm if there's all sorts of conditions. We should have those safer cars, but for now it's just a matter of people checking the vehicle as part of exiting it.
Yeah. And go ahead.
As silly as it sounds, My experience between law enforcement and EMS is I've had several cases where people have just forgotten the child was there. And it's even more so in today's society when you think the safest way to transport a child is in a rear-facing child safety seat. And if you are distracted on your phone, like many of us are nowadays, and you're just so tied up in a project and on the phone, you just lose track, you don't think. It's sad and it sounds really silly, and I imagine most of our viewing audience probably thinking that's stupid, I would never do that. But trust me, there are people out there who will forget. Dr. Mashai makes an excellent point. When you get out of your car, look around your car, look in the back seat. You should always be doing that.
Right.
But that does happen.
Yeah, I mean, just one kind of hiccup in your routine or something along those lines could totally, you see it happen.
Absolutely.
So something that parents are using is, if you've ever had this Find My Key thingy that you stick it on your keys, you can always find your keys. You can stick those to your kids. People are sticking those to their kids to ring when their kid is ever more than 50 feet away from them. Think of that. I mean, most of the time your kid should be within 50 feet of you,
Right.
and with one of these alarms, you'll get a signal every time your kid is 50 feet away from you. And I think that would be something anybody could get access to, and you could always find your kid. You could just beep, oh, there's my kid.
Right, there you go. That's your next project as health officer.
We're looking at using that for drowning prevention. I think
Okay.
I think it's actually something that people are using for drowning prevention, because there are many types of drowning alarms, but they essentially work on, the location of the child and having the alarm go off for the parent.
Yes, because not only do you have, leaving your kid in a hot car, you're trying to avoid the heat, and you get in a pool, and now you have to worry about your child drowning, and you're trying to avoid the heat illness.
That's another
and
show
now it's
on
totally
pool safety.
another
It's such an important issue.
pets. We always talk about the safety of pets because they also cannot be left in a hot car. Is there an appropriate temperature where you can leave a pet in a car?
Hartford County, by ordinance, is 70 degrees.
Okay.
Anything higher than 70 degrees, the animal cannot be left by itself in the car. It may vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and there is state law, but Hartford County's ordinance is 70 degrees.
What about outside? How do you know if it's too hot for your pet to be outside?
That's a really good question, and mostly the animals can tolerate up to 90 degrees, and I'm quite certain people will probably disagree with me on that, but if you look at most research, they will say the dog, with proper shading, can tolerate 90 degrees outside. Now, do I want to leave my pet out there? No, because I don't want to be out there in 90-degree heat. But they said they can tolerate that, and clearly when you're out there, you have to be cognizant of pavement, concrete, macadam, and blacktop. A dog's paws can burn extremely quickly and become injured. So 90 degrees is a good number, but I would consider a much lesser number to be on the safe side.
And do you feel that people maybe don't take this seriously enough as they should? You think about, I'm a healthy adult or a healthy teen, I'll be fine, I don't have anything to worry about. But you see different repercussions in the ER and you receive different phone calls in the 911 center.
Right, and there are things that will take an ordinary healthy person and put them at risk of heat stroke, and that is exertion. And people who think, I can exert myself, I'm an athlete, I'm conditioned, that's not correct. And healthy athletes in their prime who overexert during the heat will suffer from heat stroke. There's no way to be protected by this other than common sense.
And so, I'm sorry, do you have something to say?
No,
If you were outside, so you have a job outside, you're construction, you are lawn care, what do you do? I mean, what if your boss is just saying, sorry, this is what's on the plate today, you have to do the work?
Right, and at that point, hydration is your tool, and dressing appropriately. And again, we've heard about how law enforcement and firefighting, they don't have a choice. They have to be out at the site. And really their tools are to take shorter shifts, and they do. They're not exposed for extended periods, and they're trying to hydrate.
I think when you see many cultures too who are used to working in this extreme heat, you often will see that they have a full wide-brimmed hat.
Yep.
They will have long-sleeve, loose-fitting shirt and long-sleeve pants, or long pants rather. That seems also counterintuitive, but reality is they're also protecting their body from losing vapor and losing sweat and moisture too quickly. So we would think we'd want to work in shorts and t-shirt, but actually the sweat will evaporate quicker and make us less cool. So keeping clothing on, lightweight, loose fitting, will actually protect you a little bit longer.
I'm glad you brought that up because you see, I think we have a graphic on things of what to wear, prevention tips, that's one of them. can you talk about some more prevention, just overall prevention to avoid heat illness?
Well, we've already talked about being aware of when it's too hot and timing your activities. Conditioning does play a role, and spending some time just becoming generally fit is super important. People should take good care of their health and avoid obesity and exercise regularly. But really, it's a matter of not being in the heat and letting your body use its sweat mechanism, having enough hydration in order to let your body sweat as an important way to go forward.
For me, it's just being prepared. It's
Right.
just as Dr. Beshai alluded to earlier. Again, we have so much technology available to us that alerts us to what the conditions are for the day and how to properly plan. There's really no reason why someone can't take a minute or two, look at their food, look at their computer, look at their phone, whatever their information source is, and get an idea of what the day is, and then take that time to plan accordingly. Because if they don't plan, they're going to wind up in the ER or something worse possibly later.
Right. And nobody wants to wait in the ER.
No.
No.
Hours and hours.
Hours. Absolutely.
What about you? So you talked about France, the heat wave, and the temperatures didn't really seem that extreme. But do you know what happened that made?
Well, in that culture, and it's not that different here, it was the seniors that got
Okay.
most of the heat stroke. And just like here in Maryland, a lot of the seniors were on their own. And because they were on their own, they didn't have a place to go to get cool. And in August in France, all of the young generation, they're gone. They're out of the city, out on their holidays and vacations. And their moms and dads and uncles and aunts were stuck in the heat in areas without a resource to get to air conditioning. So we can learn from that example and make sure our moms and dads have an air conditioning access plan. Have a way to get to a cool spot. And that's what we're talking about in preparedness, making sure that your loved one is ready for when the heat wave comes, and it's coming.
Right. It'll be here within a couple years. Pretty bad. The main message, I feel like the takeaway from this is be prepared, pay attention to the news, to your Alexa. If you don't have an Alexa, name it something else. But also, I think a good message is to check on your neighbors. Check on it doesn't have to be elderly neighbors, but just check on your neighbors and make sure that everybody is okay.
That's really a year-long message. We advocate that yearly through DES for that very reason. Your neighbors, if you don't see them out, when they're usually out, it's a good reason to check on them to make sure they're okay, and the elderly especially.
Yes. Any closing remarks from you, Dr. Beshai?
No, it's been great spending this time with you,
Yes.
and I hope the viewers manage to stay cool this summer and
Yes.
prepare.
Right, and use the cooling centers.
Yes.
It's communicated very well through the county, so we hope that people continue to use the cooling centers. So thank you so much for being here
Absolutely.
today.
Pleasure.
That is all the time we have for today. I would like to thank my guests on today's show, Dr. Beshai and Edward Hopkins, Director of Emergency Services. If you would like more information on heat safety, please refer to our resource page after this program, and join us next time for another important health issue that matters the most to the citizens of Harford County. Thanks for watching.
You've been watching Public Health Matters, brought to you as a public service by Harford Cable Network, your county connection.